Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming out in the rain the day before Thanksgiving's travel and all the stuff that went with it. There's a fire and all the craziness that's going on in Brooklyn tonight. So I want to thank you all for coming. Here's our host and hostess. IDB Bank sponsored the evening, so thank you to them. So tonight, the topic and subject we're going to be on is anxiety, stress, and what's going on in the world. And you don't need me to tell you that what's going on is horrific. What's going on is beyond difficult. I've never experienced anything like this in my life. And the amount of uncertainty is incredible. And I think like anxiety and uncertainty really go well together or get locked together, because we live in a world today where certainty is like where we want to be. When I grew up, how long it took to get from Manhattan to Brooklyn is how long it took. No one knew it was 57 minutes or 32 minutes or 87 minutes. And when is it going to stop raining in 17 minutes? And we get conditioned to be certain about what's going to happen the next hour. And we realize with the events that happen how ridiculous that is, because we know that it's really not certain. We know that what happened on October 7th threw everyone for a loop, beyond the loop, threw everyone into turmoil, took everyone's life and turned it upside down as we know it. And that uncertainty of what happened to our people, what happens to these hostages? Talk about uncertainty, their families, themselves. The anxiety, the stress, the pain and suffering that they're going through is beyond my imagination. And at SIMHA, we said, we have to do something about it to bring together our community so they could understand that with all the stress and anxiety that we're going through, that there's a way out, or there's a way to manage it. No one could say, it's okay, honey, it's perfect, don't worry. You have nothing to worry about. When my daughters came to me and said, I'm nervous, I'm worried, when they've said it over the years, my answer is always, don't worry, everything's fine. Well, everything's not fine, and it's a ridiculous position to say, you have nothing to worry about. I don't like the word worry. I like to say there's nothing to be concerned about, and there is something to be concerned about. But we could be active, we could be proactive, and I've seen really a Jewish population that has done something incredible over the last 6 weeks. We've band together, we've united like we never have before. We've supported Israel beyond financially. I've worked with so many people that stood up and really came together and performed at levels that I've never experienced in my life. Tonight, we brought 2 doctors in, and our own very doctor, Dr. Mendelbaum, and they're going to speak to you about anxiety, mindfulness, and how to deal with it. So with no further ado, first I'm going to introduce Dr. Mendelbaum. Would you please come up? And he's going to address us. And he's from SIMHA. He's running SIMHA. He's our clinical director. And we're very fortunate to have him. He has a fabulous sense of humor. I've laughed at exactly 10% of his jokes. But the last one I laughed at, so he's on a roll. So I'd like to invite him up with no further ado, Dr. Mendelbaum.
Thank you, Mark. I hope to up that percentage. Not tonight, though, so no pressure. First, I want to just say how proud and fortunate I am to be a part of this great organization, SIMHA. I just want to publicly thank Mark Ajmi, along with Ike Towell, Cynthia Caston, Michael Paul. We're missing Nathan Hoffman and Rabbi Sutton. who are, the board members of SIMHA, which is really amazing. And Audrey Grazia, I'm sorry, but last but not least, of course. And I think it's amazing to have this organization that really can identify the needs of the community, especially in such trying times. As Mark said, we are going through something now that we never have gone through before. I don't recall having this experience. I guess 9/11 is the last thing I remember where there was so much fear and anxiety. Now I'm a bit older, so it's a little different. And seeing at SIMHA, where we work with the community to identify the mental health needs and to address those needs by making referrals and connecting people with people who can work with people's mental health issues. We're seeing that people who have previously struggled with anxiety or depression or whatever the mental health issue they have, those issues have been exacerbated. That's just the reality. COVID really increased a lot of the issues, the mental health issues that were prevalent, and what happened on October 7th, particularly for the Jewish community, there's been a dramatic increase as well. And as Mark said, there's so many different efforts that have been made. And we at SIMHA also want to, share what we can provide for the community. So what we do, as I said, we connect community members with mental health providers. The way we do that is by connecting with you. So we are the first place you come. We meet with you, we get to know you, we get to understand you, we have an appreciation for the community. And through partnering with us, we will hopefully get you to the treatment that everybody deserves and everybody needs, again, during this very difficult time. If you look to your handy brochure that should be on your seat, you will see that there are 2 QR codes. One is to join a support group, and the other is to join a Mindfulness Minute WhatsApp chat. So in addition to the mental health referrals that we provide, and that you can always call us, we're always available to meet with you, to make those assessments, to provide those referrals. In addition to that, we also are offering now a support group that you can sign up with your phone through the QR code, as well as a Mindfulness Minute chat, WhatsApp chat, where you will be able to get a mindfulness tip, a daily mindfulness tip. So anyone who's interested, I would encourage you to join those things. One of the things that we talk about with anxiety and fear and uncertainty is the need to connect with people. And I think that is so important, and I'm so glad everyone who's here tonight, because when we're struggling, we need connection. We need connection most. And so whether it's people in the community, whether it's with an organization like SIMHA, I would just encourage everybody to stay connected. Don't move away, move towards each other. The more we are connected with one another, I think the stronger we are. I'm now going to introduce Dr. Rossmarin. David Rossmarin, PhD, is the author of Thriving with Anxiety, 9 Tools to Make Anxiety Work for You. He is an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, a program director at McLean Hospital, and founder of Center for Anxiety, which provides services to over 1,000 patients in multiple states. Dr. Rossmarin is an international expert on spirituality and mental health, whose work has been featured in Scientific American, the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Dr. Rossmarin.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I have a copy of my book here. I'm going to give it out to the person who asked the best question. Is that going to make you anxious? Okay. SIMHA is a wonderful, wonderful organization, and it's a big honor to be here. You want me to tilt it down because it's in my face and you can't see it? Got it. I need your help. Thanks, because this makes me anxious. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay. I want to level set. So I'm here to speak about anxiety. I have an office called Center for Anxiety. We treat 1,000 patients a year. I've been working in Harvard Medical School doing research on anxiety and other things for 15 years. And I will tell you that I am not going to give you a single strategy to come away with less anxiety tonight. If you are looking to become less anxious, then enjoy the sushi, have a drink, maybe the other speaker will be able to help you out, but I am not your address, okay? For the next however long I'm speaking, you're not gonna get a single strategy, no tools, no nothing to be able to decrease your anxiety. So I see somebody in the back going like, what is this? Like, what was this person brought here for? Why is he here? And why am I here? And that's a really great question. And the answer is that I have a better strategy than getting rid of your anxiety. I have something that's better than any anti-anxiety medication, better than any anti-anxiety approach, better than any potion, any balm, anything that you can see which will get rid of your anxiety. In fact, I am so confident in this, I actually named my clinic Center for Anxiety. And people said, my colleagues were like, Center for Anxiety Relief, Center for Anxiety Reduction, Center for, anti-anxiety. And no, it is centerforanxiety.org because we got that URL. If I'm being honest. But that's actually the message. And at the core of what we do is actually to help people to use their anxiety to thrive. This is a tool. It is an aspect of every human being. Let me, show of hands, who here in the last month has had no anxiety? Not a single, you raising your hand? We have to talk. We have to talk. Who hasn't? There's only two types of people who don't have any anxiety, okay? Dead people. If you're dead, you don't have anxiety. And people who are so narcissistic that you probably don't want to have a conversation with them. If you're a psychopath, you have no anxiety. Like, you don't care at all about anything. Cold-hearted murderer. Okay, those are the two. You're either dead or killing people. Everybody else is in the same group. I think, by the way, is this moving? It's like totally making me nervous. No, it's actually straight. Okay, good. But I'm in the case, I have anxiety too, as I'm showing you right now. Now, there are levels of anxiety, granted. Yes, there are levels of anxiety. In fact, I think all people with mental health concerns fall into four groups. And we go in and out of these different groups over the course of a lifetime. But essentially, the same tools, the same strategies can be used irrespective of which group you currently fall into. You want to know what the four groups are? Great. Group number one are people who are flourishing. Flourishing. They're doing great, business is great, relationships are great, they're looking good, they're feeling awesome, and that is the group I am the most concerned about. Bar none. Bar none. Those are the hardest cases, the hardest situations to deal with. Usually their families are struggling, their kids are a mess. The kids of people who are flourishing, oh my God, watch out for them, right? The worst cases I've ever seen are the best looking, best educated, from the wealthiest families whose parents have no problems. Like, God help you if you're from that kind of situation. And nevertheless, people who are flourishing still have a little bit of anxiety, but typically what they do is they skirt around it. They don't face it. They don't pay attention to it. They focus on their business. They focus on their car. They focus on whatever is going well in their life, as opposed to the actual sinking feelings that are sometimes creeping up at nighttime, maybe during the daytime, maybe when they're having a difficult conversation, and they just skirt around it and everything's great. Those people definitely need to learn how to use their anxiety better. I'll get to the current crisis. I told you I would, and I will. This current crisis is I think, the worst for people who are flourishing, because all of a sudden, they're consumed with lots of anxiety that they have had no experience actually dealing with. Because they're used to just moving around it, not having conversations about the matter. I saw this in my clinic at the beginning of COVID. It was an amazing thing, and we're actually publishing a paper on it. It's under second round of review. I hope to see it in press soon. But I will tell you a preview of coming attractions, what's going to be, and hopefully we're going to do a media blitz on it, because the findings were unbelievable. This is going to knock your socks off. Patients who had anxiety in January, February, and the beginning of March of 2020, and they came into my office and they started to get treatment. When COVID hit the shores of the United States and started to ravage our communities, and we started lockdown and we didn't know, and all the craziness that we went through, those people who were in treatment beforehand did fine. They were fine. We did not see an uptick in their anxiety at the end of March. Now, the people who were totally fine beforehand never had any anxiety, never were in touch with their anxiety, because we all had some of it, never dealt with it in any way, never had conversations about it. They were the ones whose emotions fell off a cliff at the end of March 2020 and continued to decline throughout. Yes, with treatment, all groups got better. We did find that, which was optimistic, but nevertheless, it's that flourishing group, which is, I think, the hardest one. Group number 2, people who are languishing. Languishing, Adam Grant is a famous psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. He put it this way: people are feeling meh. They're like, ambling along. They're not like super distressed, but they're not flourishing either. This to me is actually a sweet spot. And if you are languishing today, consider yourself blessed. This is about the best you could be as, especially in the Jewish community in this period of history right now, in, November, December 2023, after what we've been through. I would say languishing is probably the best place to be right now, because you're aware that something's a little bit off, you're off kilter, maybe speaking to some people about it, maybe trying to find some ways to thrive, but it's not out of control. It's not something that's, really getting to people. So languishing to me, in some ways, is not a bad place to be, ironically. Then we have groups 3 and 4 who are distressed and severely distressed. I'll talk about them together. Basically, these groups are people who have significant distress or impairment. They are clinically diagnosable, if you will, but there's no real difference. There's no lab test for anxiety. You cannot say this person has an anxiety disorder and this one doesn't, interestingly. But there's a clinical line, there's a cutoff where we say, you know what, this person could really use professional help. This is where SIMHA comes in and really helps individuals to get to the right therapist, to get to some initial support, some bridging to be able to decrease stigma so people can get help. And severely distressed are people who need a lot of support. If you cannot function day to day, you can't go to work, you have to go to a residential facility, a hospital, these kinds of things, that would be severely distressed. Those are the groups. Now, people often ask me, when I talk about thriving with anxiety and using anxiety to help you, I'm really speaking about just groups 1 and 2, right? And I'm not. And I've seen people with my own eyes and worked with people who have distress or severe distress. And by actually using anxiety, they become more resilient, they become stronger, they develop better relationships, they even grow spiritually. And they move into a place where they are stronger, having gone through anxiety, than had never been affected in the first place. They become inoculated against it because they know how to use it in a constructive manner. So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say that you can get rid of your anxiety. Sorry. I'm going to do something better and show you how to use it. And I want to give a little bit of historical context first. We need to level set. In the United States of America, in 2023, we live a really, really, really great life. It's a great life. Throughout the world, it's a great life. Yeah, we complain about climate change and the economy and governments, but at the end of the day, who in this room does not have one of these? Does anyone not have a smartphone? In the entire room, okay? This can pretty much put you in Mars. It's incredible what you can do with this thing. You can contact people around the globe in 10 seconds completely for free, WhatsApp or whatever. You can get information wherever you need it, whenever you need it, all those predictions, even though they're always wrong, which is a good point from before you were saying. Is there anybody in this room who does not have access to medical care? Who here in the last 12 months has not seen a licensed physician at all? What about a dentist? Okay, so that might be a little bit tricky, but having access to a dentist. Who here does not live within a 2-mile radius of dentistry? It's amazing. Who here, we travel on cantilevered surfaces, a road that has an angle to it which is precise in order for water to be able to run off. We complain that there was a big fire, and yes, there was an accident, it's a terrible thing. But at the same time, like, emergency responders are there taking care of it. Yes, blocking the way, and not a lot, we might have affected the number of people who came tonight, but like at the end of the day, these are incredible things. Like, if you used to have a fire in the middle of a city 100 years ago, that was 15,000 lives and $6 billion, the equivalent of today of $6 billion of damage. If you look at the 20th century, World War I, World War II, in the United States, Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, I wasn't around for most of that, but like the Cuban Missile Crisis, literally the whole world was almost blown to smithereens. I mean, these are massive, colossal crises. And if you look at Israel, interestingly, they have been through 14 wars. 14 wars since its inception. 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, and then other issues like what happened in Munich, at the Munich Olympics. The Intifadas, unbelievable. I mean, terrorist activity has always been the case. Now is just the next chapter. Let me ask you a question. Who do you think has better mental health? In Israel, where it's been concentrated, or us over here in the United States, where we haven't had any of these issues whatsoever, pretty much, to deal with? Except for 9/11. When's the last time it was a major catastrophe? 9/11, and then COVID, which affected the whole world. I mean, yes, there are issues there. I'm not downplaying, disparities. I get it. Yes, I'm not saying there's nothing to complain about. You want to complain, great, just not now. But really, who has had it harder? There's no question our brothers and sisters in Israel have had it harder. Whose mental health is worse? By leaps and bounds. What's the percentage of Israelis who have an anxiety disorder relative to Americans? Any guesses? I might have a book for the person who gets it right. It's not zero. It's not zero. It's 10%. It's not, you think it's 10%. So if it's 100 people there, it's 10 there. It's a little higher. 30 is a good guess, 20 is a good guess. The answer is 25. But let's get it straight. 25%, the number of Americans who have anxiety disorders, which by the way is like 50 to 60 million US adults on every single year. Okay, my offices are pretty busy. In Israel, the per capita percentage is going to be 25%, despite what they've been through. What is going on? And the answer is they know how to use their anxiety. Israelis know how to use their anxiety. What we're seeing in such a massive way is people coming together, people rallying, people praying. They're using the anxiety for spiritual purposes, but most of all, it's also to build resilience. Who here has heard of exposure therapy? Oh, it's a SIMHA event, and I have 5 people who've heard of exposure therapy. I have to have a conversation with Rabbi Sutton. All right, so I'm glad you came, if just only for this. You think you've heard of it? Sunlight? No. Not sunlight. Almost. I think what you're talking about is like light exposure for people with seasonal affective disorder. Close, no cigar.
It's when you keep getting exposed to something over and over again and you get desensitized.
Correct. It's exposure therapy is a way of dealing with anxiety, and let me tell you what it looks like. Okay. Let's say you have, that's a good example, social anxiety. And you get really clammy around people and like a bit of that cotton mouth, and you're like, nah, you feel a little awkward. You don't like speaking to people in authority. You don't like making small talk with people. It's awkward. You feel uncomfortable. So what do we have you do as a therapist? We have you come up and give a talk. Anybody? If you're socially anxious, giving a talk in front of 50 people is like, I'd prefer to die, right? It's like explosive. And the same thing, let's say people are afraid of spiders. So I literally have a guy on speed dial on my phone who comes in with tarantulas to my office. And no, I am not kidding. And let's say you're afraid of snakes. It's the same guy. He has snakes and spiders. Now we start off with watching videos, we start off with looking at pictures even, watching videos, looking at them behind cages, but eventually, there is a tarantula going on your arm. And you're like, why would I do that? The reason the anxiety that comes out when people do this is so visceral, it is so uncomfortable. You can see them in the therapy room, they're literally wretched. They're like, oh my God, this is enveloping me, I can't handle this, it's like too much, and then they come out of it sometimes 2 hours later, and they're like, this is fine, I did it. And they're like playing with the spider. I kid you not, they are playing with the spider. It's not always as easy. You know, if people are afraid of driving through tunnels, over bridges, we get in the car with them. If people are afraid of flying, I've done short haul flights, I've done long haul flights with my patients. And we're not talking about using Xanax along the way, right? Like, they actually face the fear. What ends up happening when you take this approach is something called resilience. I'm going to tell you a story about a patient I saw who became more resilient from going through exposure therapy. She had obsessive compulsive disorder, which is arguably an anxiety disorder. In her case, it was definitely anxiety. She had some hypochondriasis. She was very concerned about her health. Specifically, she was concerned that she had some sort of issue with her brain. And we knew there was nothing wrong with her brain. She had been to a neurologist, she had MRIs, she was fine. This person was fine. If I knew one thing about her brain, it was that she did not have anything wrong. She was concerned about having an aneurysm. So what she ended up doing was developing agoraphobia, where she actually wouldn't go places. And the reason why is because if she would leave her house, then she would start to feel anxious, and then she would be nervous that her blood pressure would increase, and the aneurysm, which is imagined, would pop, and then she would drop dead, and that wouldn't be good, so she wanted to avoid that, so she ended up staying at home. And her life became smaller and smaller and smaller. At first, she wouldn't go to friends' houses. At first she wouldn't go there overnight, because maybe she'd die in her sleep. And then she just wouldn't go during the day. And then she wouldn't go to the supermarket. And then she wouldn't go buses, planes, anything. Like her life she stopped dating. This is a single girl. Her life became extremely small because of her anxiety. And I said to her, what I'm saying to you now, we're not gonna get rid of your anxiety, we're gonna face it, we're gonna, give you an aneurysm and kill you. No, I'm kidding. But there are ways for her to think about it, like watching videos of people who had an aneurysm, and reading stories about people who had aneurysms, and going to medical wards of people who are going through brain surgery, not quite like live, but like, going through neurology wards. And also, she was terrified that if she slept overnight in a place and nobody knew, that she might die and end up in a city morgue. So for her graduation exposure, her last thing of facing her fears, she went to a different city, paid cash for the ticket, stayed in a hotel, nobody knew she was there without her cell phone. She said throughout the entire night, she could not stop panicking. It was one of the most excruciating anxiety experiences that she ever had. Okay. She ended up saying, I can do anything now. I'm not scared. Because I know that if my anxiety gets super high, I'm not going to squish it, I'm not going to squelch it, I'm not going to get rid of it, I'm going to let it be, and I'm not going to let it ruin my life. Because you know what? This is just part of who I am. The PS on the story, she did get married, she did get pregnant, and she called me up with a very serious question in her 3rd trimester. They found something on the ultrasound in the baby's brain. Oh my gosh. Of all people for this to happen to, right? And she's like, I don't know, like I'm having a bit of a hard time with this. I'm like, bit of a hard time with this? Are you kidding? I'd be freaking out. She's like, I don't know, like maybe I need more therapy. I'm like, you should be giving therapy, lady. Like, you are so calm. How are you handling this? She delivered, they had life-saving surgery, the baby survived, and she waltzed through it. She waltzed through it. And she credited having gone through exposure therapy. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies to harness the anxiety today. Number 1, lean into it. Don't get rid of it. Don't distract yourself. And that doesn't mean watching crazy things on the news all day, okay? 30 minutes a day is enough, and 30 minutes before bedtime, shut off your phone. Shut off your phone, because you don't need to do it too much. But if you're feeling uncomfortable, let yourself experience it. There were 3 or 4 times today where I got an email, I got a message, just before, I was talking to my friends over here. I got a call from someone in my office who's like flipping out about something, and I'm like, it just happens. Like, it just happens. Accept the anxiety, let it be, don't try to get rid of it. For me, it happens right here. I felt like a pressure in my chest for the last 6 weeks because of what's going on. And I'm not trying to get rid of it. The more I try to fight it, the worse it is. Let it be. Let that build your resilience. The second strategy, talk to people about it. Have a conversation. When you do, it actually increases your emotional intimacy with the person. Think about it. Who are the people you're closest to in this world? The ones who you're having shallow conversations with, or the ones who you can actually open up to when things are going bad? If you have a shoulder to cry on, do it. It'll increase your connection with that person. Emotional intimacy is a function of, and I realize there's a lot of men in the audience, and this is kind of foreign, I get it, but go there. Talk about what's going on with each other. Ideally with your romantic partners, if you're lucky enough to have one. That's a second strategy to harness our anxiety in this day and age. I think the third strategy, though, and again, these are not intended to get rid of your anxiety. Allow yourself to experience it, don't fight it. Use it to connect to other people, talk to them about it. And the third one, though, which is really what I wanted to sort of riff on here for a couple minutes and then wrap up, is our spiritual connection. Part of living in the United States of America is that, and you really took the words, you said it so beautifully, that we pride ourselves on having more control, on minimizing uncertainty, that we should know everything mapped out. Kids especially today, young adults and teens, their anxiety is through the roof. Because yes, they don't allow themselves to experience the anxiety, and yes, they don't speak to each other except through electronic means, which is not a great way to share your actual feelings, because you can just shut off the conversation if it goes badly. But most of all, kids today think that everything should go well. And the minute you hit a situation that you can't control and that you can't understand, it's like, I'm a failure. Something's wrong with me. That's the perception. Instead, I think we have to turn to spirituality. I think we have to turn to God. And I've been saying this publicly to secular audiences with the release of my book over the last several weeks, since it was released in mid-October, that human beings are not designed to know everything. We're not designed to be in control of everything. That's not the way we are. That's not our role in the universe. We were never supposed to be these omniscient, omnipotent creatures that could just snap our fingers and get things done. Yes, it's easier to run things today, but that doesn't mean it's going to be simple, and that doesn't mean there's a guarantee. The fact that there's adversity, the fact that things are out of our control is what makes us human. I'll ask you a very simple question. Please raise your hands if you chose whether to be born. Okay, if you chose when to be born, or where to be born. And which are the factors that impact your life more than anything else? Things that we have absolutely no control over. You have a beautiful night, you have awesome sushi, you have a gorgeous room, and it rains, and there's a fire, and it's almost, we do the best we can. And the rest, you just got to give it up. And part of dealing with anxiety, and this is what they do in Israel so much better than we do because of the spiritual zeitgeist, was of the spiritual culture of living in that environment, of living in Israel, living in even the Middle East, certainly that whole region of the world, but certainly living in Israel. There's something special about being there and having a sense, if you've been there, I'm sure many of you have, you walk off the plane and you have the sense that I don't have to be in control because it's going to be okay. We are struggling because we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't live in that world. But we can. We can remind ourselves. And we can use our anxiety to parlay into prayer, to parlay into an acceptance of our limited place in this world, and actually to not fight against it like we're doing, which just makes the anxiety worse, but to let go, just to let go a little bit. I know people are very concerned about anti-Semitism, and people are thinking about taking off their yarmulkes and their kippot, I should say, their mezuzot even, from the doors. And, you know, I'm not a safety expert, so perhaps I'm not the right person to think, to comment on this matter. But I will tell you that we should be asking, at what point do we just need to let go? At what point do we just need to let go? And I'm not saying I would do things that are actually dangerous. You know, if there's a clear and present danger in front of you, obviously, don't do something. But maybe the message, I would actually say it's stronger. I think that the message of the current situation and the message that we had of COVID, and same of 9/11, and same of all the issues that we've experienced here in the United States, and certainly throughout Jewish history, has been that there is a power in letting go. That's actually where we become strong. That is our strength. Not just for the Jewish people, but for humanity. It's for humanity, that's what makes us strength. When we let go and we don't allow anxiety to be viewed as a disease, when we see it as part of who we are, and when we learn to thrive with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Osborne, for those insights. I forgot to mention that we're going to have David Cohen speak to us a little bit about mindfulness and anxiety. And afterwards, we will have about 10 to 15 minutes of questions. If anyone has any questions, I will direct you again back to that brochure. The number we have on there, you can text any questions to that number and we will get it. And then we will then ask David Cohen and Dr. Osborne to answer those questions. So you can be anonymous or not, but you have that option just to text it. I have a little bit of a sort of drive or desire to lean into what Dr. Osborne said and, you know, maybe sort of expose myself here and make some jokes, but I'm not going to. And that was a joke, okay, so I did it. I'm happy to introduce Mr. David Cohen. David Cohen is a highly accomplished clinical social worker dedicated to facilitating healing and empowerment for individuals. He operates a thriving private practice where he delivers compassionate and evidence-based care. Beyond his private practice, David assumes the pivotal role of Chief Clinical Officer at Way of Hope, which is an organization working with victims, survivors of sexual abuse. David's therapeutic approach extends beyond conventional methods, as he seamlessly integrates mindfulness meditation into his practice, residing in New City, New York, next to me, alongside his wife and 5 sons. David Cohen.
Hi everybody, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. So first of all, I just want to begin by acknowledging SIMHA and Mark, and my good friend Ike, and everybody else on the board, Audrey, and Dr. Mandelbaum for having me. And the evening is already a bit late. Take a moment. Take a moment. What changed? What just happened? So everybody was sitting, everybody was listening, everybody was present in varying degrees. Some people might have been holding their phone, some people might have been having a little bit of conversation, holding a cup, eating something, thinking about what was just said, or thinking about 50 million other things, or maybe shifting from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other. This is perfectly ordinary. This is what we all do all the time, right? So if we stop and we think about it, all of us, at every single waking moment of our lives, are in one of 3 potential postures or orientations. We could be leaning forward, and I don't mean physically, but I mean we could be thinking about something that's in the future. This is where anxiety lives. This is where worry lives. What's going to happen? How are things going to be? What's going to be with me? What's going to be tomorrow? What's going to happen with Israel? We could be leaning forward in another way. We could be thinking about something we want, something we're looking forward to. Oh, I can't wait to be there. I look forward to dinner in my favorite restaurant. We're leaning forward. Or we could be oriented backwards. We could be thinking about the past. We could be ruminating. We could be sort of beating ourselves up. I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have handled the situation that way. Playing over in our minds some conversation or some situation that we've been in. I wish I would have done it like that next time. Now we're going from backwards, I'm going into the forwards. Next time I'm going to do it that way. And the third possibility is to just be present. This word mindfulness has become so popularized in recent times, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people. I'd like to avoid using that word too much this evening for the few minutes that I have with you. But I want to talk about what it actually means. We could use words, and words represent something. I could say I'm depressed, you could say you're depressed, and we could mean two completely different things, right? I could be suffering from depression, and I'm talking about a real debilitating condition. And you could be talking about a passing emotion that you have, that you refer to as, how many of us have kids? I'm starving. I'm not starving, but this is how they'll speak, right? Okay, so I want to get behind the word mindfulness for a few minutes. Talk about what this is for us. So I'm a therapist. These days when I begin sessions, I'll say to clients, as I always do, how are you? And people will say, I'm not okay. And I'll say, I'm also not okay. No one's really that okay these days. The first thing to understand about this mindfulness thing is to appreciate and to have an understanding for ourselves of what we're going through and what we're feeling and what we're dealing with. Fear is a very important, necessary capacity that we have as human beings. It's okay to feel fear. It makes sense in this day and age that we're going to be experiencing fear sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes. And to be conscious of that and to say, it makes sense that I'm having these thoughts and these feelings, is a very important, component of what we call mindfulness. In other words, we need to be able to relate with our experiences. Or, if we don't, what we do is we inevitably judge ourselves for it. So now what we're doing is we're taking an experience that we're having, which is unpleasant or difficult or painful or challenging, and then we beat up on ourselves for it. Like, why am I so busy in my head with this? My friend seems okay, why am I not okay? Like he or she is. I had a better day yesterday, why am I not having a day like I had yesterday? Why am I struggling today? So what we're doing is we're taking a normal, understandable challenge that we're having as human beings, and then we're adding to our own distress by saying, this is not okay. We're not supposed to be having these thoughts or these feelings. So the first component that I'm highlighting for us is to be able to appreciate that what we're thinking, what we're feeling is okay. It's not that it feels okay, but like we're human. This is what happens. Especially given circumstances and world events. So we normalize, we humanize ourselves. And appreciate like this, I'm just a human being, I'm struggling. So when I say to my client, I'm also not okay. Like, who's okay these days? The word languishing, Dr. Rosemary used, we're all to some degree struggling. Sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes more consciously, sometimes it's more in the background, simmering for us. And it's okay. It's okay that we're experiencing this way. It makes sense given the realities of our times. I'd like to invite you to consider a time that you were laying in bed trying to fall asleep and it wasn't working. Or, maybe a bit more unpleasant, consider a time that you were struggling with some dental pain. You were going to go to the dentist, the appointment was scheduled, but you weren't there yet, problem wasn't fixed yet. Or you're in the dentist chair, and the dentist is working on you, and there's some pain, there's some dental pain. So, or pick a different example, pick something else. A situation that I share with clients that comes to mind is I accidentally slammed my file cabinet on my thumb once in my office. there was no lasting injury, but there was a few, 10 seconds to half a minute of some real acute pain in my thumb. What's happening in those moments? What are our options for how we're experiencing those moments? I want to lay it out for you. These are our options. One option is, oh, this is not okay. I have to fall asleep. I gotta get up early tomorrow. I have to fall asleep. So we're like willing ourselves into sleep, as if that's gonna work. It's like saying, don't think about a pink elephant right now. Or you're experiencing dental pain. I don't want this feeling. I don't want that. We're tightening up against it. We're resisting that feeling. So that's one posture. And it's sort of reflexive. If something is painful or something is difficult, we don't want it. So we're just going to be pushing away from it. Mentally, physically, distancing ourselves from it. Okay, then there's another way to be with this. We think we're a bit wiser. I have to let the pain pass. So we're going to sit with the pain. We're going to sit with the discomfort. We're going to sit with the stress. And really what we're doing in the back of our head, we're monitoring when it actually goes. Okay, I understand that I'm having trouble falling asleep now. So, okay, this is what's happening. But actually I'm looking, so one of my phones, it's been 5 minutes, it's another 10 minutes now, when am I going to fall asleep? So we can fool ourselves into thinking that we're sort of accepting or allowing or making some space for our experiences, but really the attitude that we're having in that moment is, this has got to go. And I'm just trying to sort of push it out of the way in this indirect way. The third posture, the third position, the third option is to actually make space for whatever is present. And this isn't always so easy, especially when the experience that we're having, whether it's psychological and emotional, situational, physically, there's pain. So we're not looking to have this. We don't want it. But if we push against it, right? If we don't have any sort of sense of acceptance that this is what's here now, not because I want it, not because I'm wishing it for myself, not because I'm inviting it, but simply because this is what's here, now we're in this posture, we're in this position, this attitude within ourselves of resisting our experience. It only makes it worse, whether it's trying to fall asleep, whether it's experiencing physical pain, stress, worry, anxiety, whatever it is. So the other option is to really acknowledge that this is here. And then, as I said before, if the situation makes sense, to humanize that for the moment. Like, okay, this makes sense to me that this is what I'm having. I have this dialogue in my head, consciously. I train myself, I habituate myself to have this. When I'm in some sort of stress or internal struggle with something that's going on in my life, to consciously say, my self-talk should be, do you understand why you're having this? Does this make sense to you? Is it understandable? To put yourself into that posture of, okay, this makes sense. In the context of what I'm going through, in this circumstance, in this situation, whether it's my personal life, whether it's a broader, like a world event, this makes sense to me. And then within that position, can I notice what I'm experiencing? Can I notice what I'm feeling? Can I acknowledge it to myself? Without that sense of pushing and pushing and pushing. So what I'd like to invite you all to do is take a moment, think about something that you can acknowledge in your mind you're grateful for. It could be big, it could be small, it could be about the broader world, it could be just about something that happened today in your day. It could be something like you're grateful that the room is less chilly than it was before. It could be anything, big or small. Just take a moment to acknowledge something that just acknowledge some gratitude, some sense of gratefulness for. Okay. Now take a moment and allow yourself to check in with yourself. What are you noticing right now? Is it the feet in contact with the floor? Is it temperature in the room? Is it the sound of my voice? Or the silence, the space in between my words? Just notice something that you can experience through your five senses, whether it's the feeling of temperature, it's the sensory experience of your clothes against your body. Maybe one hand is on your leg or one leg is crossed over the other. Just notice it. Now take a moment and notice your thoughts. What's going on in your mind? Is there an overall sense of, I'm just present, I'm listening? Or there's a feeling of, I'm preoccupied. I've got a lot going on right now in my mind. It's hard to sit. It's hard to just be still. There's almost like an energy level that we can tune into when we notice our thoughts. The mind could be calm, sort of still. It could be racing, it could be roiling, it could be restless. It's like the mind can have its own mood. And now, take another moment to ask yourself, can you acknowledge something else that you have gratitude for? You can acknowledge, even if you're not feeling it, but you can at least acknowledge something that you are grateful for. Maybe something else. Choose something else from what you chose before. So I call this little exercise a mindfulness sandwich. Start off with something you're grateful for. Tune into yourself for a minute. End with something that you're grateful for. This could literally take 30 seconds, or you could sit for 60 to 120 seconds, right? But it doesn't take longer than that. And practice this in the middle of your day. Maybe set reminders in your phone to randomly go off a couple of times in the day. And just stop what you're doing for just a moment. Tune into something you feel where you can acknowledge gratitude for. Tune into what you're noticing in the body and with your senses. And with something else that you could acknowledge gratitude for. And then go on with your day. So I teach mindfulness meditation, and I sit in meditation for long periods of time. Once or twice a year, I'll go on a 5 to 10 day meditation retreat, where that's pretty much all you do all day is sit in meditation. And I teach this to people who want to do this too, just sit for long periods of time in mindfulness. I used to think that the more you practice this and the longer you sit in it, the more you're going to have the benefits of that in your life. I don't think it's so simple anymore these days. I think that when we do simple practices like I just did with you, and you pepper them in your day just a couple of times throughout your day, literally a few seconds each one, and you do this every single day, you're going to get more from that practice than from just sitting once a day for 30 to 60 minutes. You're going to get more out of this little, simple, integrating into your life practice. I want to offer you another one. So, this is a sort of a variation on the one that we just did. So we have the word stop, S-T-O-P. So let's use it as a mnemonic. S is stop. Just take a moment, whatever you're doing. Take a pause. T stands for take a breath. Take an intentional breath in, breath out. O stands for observe. Notice what's going on inside you. Just check out what it's feeling like in the body. Check out what you're thinking. Just notice your thoughts. Maybe notice your emotional state. What's going on? How are you feeling? And then, once you've acknowledged that, P is proceed. Just go on with your day. Keep on doing whatever you were doing. These little moments of stopping and tuning in and just acknowledging what's present and then proceeding with your day interrupts this flow that we tend to have of our habits of always being leaning into the forward or leaning into the backward, or what most of us are doing is constantly rocking back and forth internally between the forward thinking and the backward thinking. We're ruminating about something that happened, we're planning or worrying about something that didn't yet happen, and how often are we actually consciously, intentionally orienting ourselves to just really being present? Now here's the little thing about this mindfulness that I want to acknowledge. Sometimes people don't acknowledge this enough. I think it's important. If you start becoming more consciously, more intentionally present, you're also going to be more present for what isn't so pleasant. The moments that are feeling stressed, or sad, or scary, or stressful. Sometimes people think that if you practice this, you're just going to feel better all the time. I don't think that's true. You're not going to feel better all the time. But you can feel more spacious. You can feel more grounded. You can feel more anchored within yourself. Like, I can have the capacity to take in whatever I'm experiencing. It doesn't have to rock me in the way that it used to. There's actually a Gemara, and I also read it as a Buddhist proverb at one point, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Different traditions say the same thing. They give the parable of a very tall tree, strong tree, strongest, biggest tree in the world. Next to the tree is growing some grass. When a wind comes, what happens to the tree? Nothing. The tree is unmoving. So when the wind comes, what happens to the grass? Well, the grass bows and blows in whatever direction the wind takes it. And now imagine that the strongest wind, the strongest storm, the most powerful hurricane comes along. What happens to the tree? It uproots the tree. The tree gets knocked down. And it ain't getting back up. It's down for the count. And what happens to the grass? The same thing that happened with the breeze. It blows in the direction that the wind took it, and when the wind passes, the grass is up. So what's actually stronger, the tree or the grass? We don't tend to typically see strength in that way, but Dr. Rosemary used the word resilience. The ability to bend and to feel the bend and to acknowledge the bend, the blowing of the winds. Okay, now's a stressful time in my life, in my community's life, in the Jewish nation's life. There's going to be a lot of blowing and bending with the winds that are blowing. If I attempt to say, I'm okay, I'm stronger than this, I won't be affected by this, it's not going to work. And it could be something just personal going on in our lives. It's not going to work. So the winds blow, and we bend, and we get affected, and we acknowledge the impact of how it's affecting us, and we humanize that experience for ourselves. We see it with understanding that this is okay, this is normal, this is understandable. We don't beat ourselves up or judge ourselves for the fact that we're being affected or being impacted. This sense of space that we're making for our experiences, this is what we mean when we say mindfulness. You can read all sorts of books and articles and people talking about mindfulness. This is it. It's not a technique, it's a spirit, it's an attitude of how to be with ourselves in our own experience. Yeah. So I want to leave you with just one more practice. So if you're holding anything, just put it down on the chair next to you, if you don't mind. Keep your eyes open. A lot of times people will practice mindfulness and they'll ask for eyes closed. Let's practice with our eyes open. Okay. Notice how you're sitting. If you have both feet on the floor or if you have one foot crossed, just notice. Get yourself comfortable. And take a moment now to acknowledge where you are. Ask yourself now, what did you just think when you acknowledged where you are? Did you think about this space, this physical location? Did you think about this event? Ask yourself again, where am I right now? Maybe what comes up is a thought about where you want to be, and it's not here. That's okay. Just notice that. Maybe I'm tired. I want to be in bed really. Or I have something going on at home. It's on my mind. Right? Just notice that. What's it feeling like physically in the body right now? Just notice. Anything particularly that comes up, any particular sensation or area in the body that's noticeable. Notice if you can feel the feeling of breathing right now and where you feel it. How do you know that you're breathing right now? How do you know physically? You're feeling it over here, maybe over here. Maybe you're breathing through your mouth and you're noticing it, or through your nose. Just tuning in. So we're so accustomed to doing something and fixing something and resolving something. Dr. Rosemary was talking about allowing the anxiety to just be as it is and appreciating what that can offer for us. This is really the spirit of mindfulness. Just noticing what is, becoming accustomed to noticing what is. Like if we don't do this, if we don't stop and check in with ourselves, we're not going to. Our habits of thought, the way that we deal with life, for better and for worse, will just keep on going just that way. But take a moment and notice. Just take a moment and notice. Simplest thing in the world. They say practicing mindfulness is simple but not easy. There is an important distinction there. It is the simplest thing in the world to just be present and notice what is. It may not be, what is may not be pleasant, may not be so comfortable. Appreciate the noticing. Right? On the way here, I came in from New City, so there was quite a drive. I was listening to a podcast, this Jewish podcast called 1840, and their newest episode, he interviews a guy from Israel, Rabbi Doron Perez, I think his name is, originally South African. He lives in Israel with his family. I think he was in the news in the early days after the massacre. He has 2 sons in the army. One got injured, and the other one went missing. He's MIA, along with 2 or 3 other of his troops. Still MIA. They don't know where he is, what happened. There's no video, no eyewitnesses. And then within a week or 2 weeks after that, he married off a son. A son of his got married. And he interviews him about this crazy, paradoxical, extreme experience that he's having of, on one hand, he has a child who's MIA, has no idea where he is, what's up. And on the other hand, he's marrying off another son. How does he live with those 2 experiences? What's that like? On some much more ordinary, mundane degree, we experience those kind of extremes as well. Now, obviously, that's a pretty extraordinary situation and circumstance. It's worth listening to. Very powerful how he talks about this. He talks about how under the chuppah, his plan was, he was asked, how am I going to cope with this wedding? He said, my plan was to not think about my son who's MIA during the wedding. I'm just going to be here for my son who's getting married. I'll be with the SIMHA, I'll be with the joy. I'll think about him when the wedding is over. Then the rabbi got up to officiate at the chuppah, and he started off by saying, we have to acknowledge, I think Daniel, I don't remember his name, who's missing, who's MIA. And everybody was crying, and they prayed, and then they switched gears, and everybody was dancing and singing. Right? Sounds crazy, but that's really what was needed in that moment, to acknowledge the realities of everything that was present. On some level, we have these types of extremes on a very ordinary level in our lives. We experience the ups and the downs. We're in the joys of life, and we're in the stressors and the pains and the challenges of our life. And all mixed up, not just in one day, but in 1 hour. Not just in 1 hour, but within 1 minute. We could make space for it all by acknowledging it, by becoming more present with it, or we could be just holding on, trying to not fall off the roller coaster here of life. So really, it's as simple as that. Taking a moment, intentionally checking in with yourself, seeing what's going on, not by trying to fix it or judge it, but just by taking it in, and then going on with your life. A couple hours later, do the same thing. I have a friend who's a therapist. He says to his clients, if you do everything I say and it doesn't work, I promise to refund your misery in full. So I want to invite you to take this and make it into a practice, a daily practice in your life. And let me know in a couple weeks if you don't notice a difference, a qualitative difference. Life doesn't change. Reality around us doesn't change. This isn't some magical way of changing our life, but our internal conditions, the weather, how the wind is blowing inside us. Are we attempting to just hold it or deny it, push it away? Or are we bending a little bit more with it? And what's that like? I invite us all to discover that. Okay, thank you all for your time.
Stay here, if you would. I don't know if they were able to text the questions, but if you would, Doc, come up also. We're going to do an open forum and let the people ask questions. I'll ask either one of you. How do I handle a loved one clearly going through anxiety, but not realizing it themselves? In other words, they're not attuned to it. They don't get it.
I'll share a thought, and Dr. Roseman will piggyback onto this. The first thought that came to my mind, and I guess this is sort of in theme with my topic of mindfulness, is what's it like for the person who's asking the question? What's it like for me to be thinking about a loved one and concerned about them? How anxious does that make me? Right? What's going on for me? I have 5 kids. God bless each one is healthy and beautiful in their own way, but they all have struggles in different ways in their life, right? I could think about one of my kids right now and some of the challenges that he's dealing with, and I can completely forget about what's happening for me as I'm thinking about it. I'm just in daddy mode, right? I'm just in parent mode, and I'm thinking about my loved one. What's happening for me? Am I aware about that? Do I have any sense do I have a sense of groundedness in myself? And if I don't, and I'm going to attempt to be helpful to the other person, how helpful will that be? In what way will that color how I might try to talk to them or approach this with them? What will change if I'm able to be aware first and foremost within myself that I'm being impacted by this experience? So I just first wanted to give a shout out for just that awareness of, even from the perspective of the person asking who's concerned, what's happening inside me?
Great, thank you. I am going to piggyback on that. So if you love somebody who's anxious, once you're clear on how that makes you feel, it's important to express that to the person. So there are different ways that people who are anxious manifest their symptoms if they're not aware of their anxiety and don't want to deal with it. Primarily, they either avoid or they'll fight. They'll either be aggressive or they will avoid being in situations. It's the fight or flight response. That's literally what anxiety does. It'll make you more agitated, more externalizing, more boisterous would be to put it mildly, and sort of aggressive or tough would be, probably more accurate. Or it can lead to more meekness, more avoiding situations. I've seen patients, families where a husband was extremely distressed by the fact that his wife had obsessive compulsive disorder and really struggled with, day-to-day tasks because she's concerned about germs, she's concerned about hypochondriasis, she's concerned about all sorts of things. I've seen situations where, you have a man who's really struggling with anxiety, doesn't really want to deal with it, can't work as much, isn't, I should say, is struggling to work as much and to be optimally functional, and his wife is getting angry about it. And what has to happen in those situations is for the supportive partner to just say, this is what I see going on, and this is how it affects me. This is to have a real conversation, this is hard, and this is why it's hard. As opposed to, you idiot, take care of this, what's wrong with you? That never works with people who are anxious. But speaking from the heart, once you're aware of it, that can make a difference. Even then, it doesn't always, because sometimes people just don't have the wherewithal right now to deal with their anxiety, and we have to accept that. That's where they are. But at least speaking from the heart maximizes the chances of getting the response that you want.
Because I wanted to give my answer, if that's okay. The first part is called SIMHA. That's why we're here. The second part is, I think, there's a metaphor I think people use a lot is, there's this fight between the wind and the sun. It said, who's stronger? The sun says, I'm stronger. And the wind says, no, I'm stronger. So they say, okay, let's see. Let's have a competition. Let's have a test. They see someone who has a jacket on. And so the sun says, you go first, tells the wind. The wind says, okay. And the wind starts blowing. And the person who has the jacket on starts, maybe buttoning the jacket, starts blowing even, stronger. The person starts grabbing at the jacket. Blows even stronger. The person's tying down a rope, putting that jacket on as tight as possible. And the sun says, let me give it a shot. The sun starts shining, shining, and shining. And the person takes off the jacket. And so, I think the metaphor, what it symbolizes is that you really, to fight someone, to push someone, to go against what they want is often ineffective. And what is more effective is how do you meet them with warmth? How do you sort of show compassion? How do you meet them where they're at? So they can't acknowledge they have anxiety. Okay, well, can they acknowledge that they're not sleeping well? Can you tap into the parts that they can align with? How do you partner with them? like SIMHA tries to do with people and try to partner. So that is my answer to that question. But I will say it is really, really difficult when you're watching family members who are struggling. I will say that's one of the most difficult things that I see at SIMHA is how stuck and how challenging that can be for everyone. The next question, which is actually the last question, I'm sorry, is how to process emotions that feel so close to us yet so far. For example, Israel related.
The first thing that comes to mind is a saying, I don't know who originally said this, but I use it often with my family and with clients. Any abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal. Any abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal. And it really allows us to put perspective on what it's like when we're having reactions to experiences. We tend to sort of get very self-conscious and think that there's a right way to have a reaction, that there's a right way to have an experience, and then there's a wrong way. And then we find, for some reason, we have this built-in bias, and there are reasons, but not necessary to get into now. But you know, we presume we're on the wrong side of that. We don't tend to think, oh, my feeling is, you know, the way I'm dealing with this is okay. It's the other one. We tend to get sort of critical with ourselves and self-conscious around that. So I think that this question sort of has that built into it. Like, there's somebody out there who's experiencing what we're going through in some way that's more ideal than how I'm feeling about it or thinking about it. People cope with the realities of their lives in all sorts of different ways. And I like to give the metaphor that different coping mechanisms that we have, you know, fight and flight was mentioned before, but there's a few others. They're like different flavors of the same ice cream. Right? So they look different, they manifest a little differently, but they're all still ice cream. They're just different flavors. Some people just will go with their coping mechanism one way. Some people will go another way. Some people go to the dentist, and in their distress, they say to the dentist, give me a mirror. I want to see everything that's happening. I want you to describe step by step what's happening. And other people say, knock me out, wake me up when it's over, I'll pay the bill, and I'm getting the hell out. Is there a right way and a wrong way? It's just two different ways. People attend, people distract, people shut down, people get really reactive. There isn't a right and a wrong way. Obviously, when we're experiencing events that are extraordinary, it makes sense that we're going to have feelings that range the entire gamut. And what I also hear in this question is sort of like a certain type of guilt, almost like a cousin to survivor's guilt of like, well, so many of my brothers and sisters are struggling with this in such big ways. Like, well, I'm so removed from it, and it's not impacting me in such a direct way. So like, you know, it's wrong for me to think that like I'm stressing about this or that my anxiety is real or legit. It's just another way of getting down on ourselves and creating more struggle in something that's already a struggle. So I would just acknowledge that, like bring an awareness if any of that is happening in our thinking. Be aware of that.
That's what it needs. I think we're so close to what's going on over there because of all the technology that we have. I mean, it really doesn't take a lot to, you know, even to fly over there. Out of JFK, there's like 3 flights, LL has 7 flights a day. So I'm not sure what it means. I think the world is smaller than ever, and if anything, you know, the question is how to get some distance from it. I think, you know, we and I mentioned this in passing in my remarks before, you know, I do think we have to set some reasonable limits on how much we digest what's going on, especially being here in the United States, and sort of like taper it down to us. And to me, 30 minutes, unless you work in the media, 30 minutes a day of exposure to the news is plenty. And I also have a general rule that I say to really everyone these days, which is a half an hour before bedtime. And yes, you should have a bedtime. We can talk about that too. To stop using devices and certainly to stop looking at, you know, at the news and what's going on in Israel. You'll catch up tomorrow. I mean, you know, the news cycle here, everything's starting in the morning anyway. I don't know if you've noticed that. 6, 7, 8 a.m. is usually when stuff starts to filter in. So you're not going to get a whole lot of extra news at 2, 1, 2, 11, you know, 10, 11, 12 at night.
Is there a difference between stress, distress, anxiety, and fear? And is the approach to each one the same?
Chapter 1 of my new book. So Anxiety is the same response as fear, but there's one key difference. Fear is a natural, healthy, good response that people have to keep you safe when there's an actual threat. So if you're stepping off the curb and there's a van or truck which is coming towards you, and that startle response, which helps you to either fight or flee, hopefully to flee in that case, to get back onto the curb and to keep you safe. Anxiety is the same thing, but there's no real car. It's like a misfire of the system. And that's fine. You can have a misfire. That's perfectly fine. It's like a smoke alarm that goes off with a little bit of smoke as opposed to an actual, fire. It means your smoke alarm works. Stress is a little different. Stress is when there's an imbalance between your demands and your resources. And the problem with stress is that the approach that I was saying before, face the fear, get out there, let yourself experience it. When it comes to stress, you actually need to take a little bit of a different approach, which is to recalibrate and rebalance. Because what happens often when people have too many demands, not enough resources, it's fine to be a little bit out of balance and to have a little stress, but if it's chronic stress and it's very tough, people tend to take on more and more and more and more, as opposed to accepting their limits. So there is a difference in the way that we approach each of these three things. And for more, you're welcome to take a look.
I think he wins the book.
Huh? Probably a better question. So you can probably go there.
Okay, so at this point, Ahava has left, she's gone, but I want to thank her. Ahava worked very hard on putting this whole evening together. She worked tirelessly, and she did a fabulous job, so I want to thank her. And then lastly, I want to remind you, at SIMHA, we are going to put together a support group for anxiety. It's just a group, will be led by, there'll be a group leader, and there's no charge for it, so if anyone wants to join, you could do this little click thing, or you could call our office. And we also will have a mindfulness minute on a WhatsApp chat that you'll receive, like a daily mindful minute. So thank you for coming tonight. God bless you. Stay calm.